He says the problem with teachers is, what's a kid going to learn from someone who decided his best option in life is to become a teacher? He reminds the other dinner guests that it's true what they say about teachers, that those who can do, and those who can't teach. I decide to bite my tongue instead of his and resist the urge to remind the other dinner guests that it's also true what they say about lawyers. Because we're eating, after all, and this is polite conversation. I mean, you're a teacher, Taylor. Be honest. What do you make? And I wish he hadn't done that. Asked me to be honest, because you see, I have a policy about honesty and ass-kicking, which is, if you ask for it, then I have to let you have it. You want to know what I make? I make kids work harder than they ever thought they could. I can make a C+ feel like a Congressional Medal of Honor, and I can make an A- feel like a slap in the face. How dare you waste my time with anything less than your very best? You want to know what I make? I make kids sit through 40 minutes of study hall in absolute silence. No, you cannot work in groups. No, you can't ask a question. So put your hand down. Why won't I let you go to the bathroom? Because you're bored and you don't really have to go, do you? You want to know what I make? I make parents tremble in fear when I call home at around dinner time. Hi, this is Mr. Molly. I hope I haven't called at a bad time. I just wanted to talk to you about something that your son did today. He said, "Leave the kid alone. I still cry sometimes, don't you?" And it was the noblest act of courage that I have ever seen. I make parents see their children for who they are and who they can be. You want to know what I make? I make kids question. I make them criticize. I make them apologize and mean it. I make them write, and then I make them read. I make them spell definitely beautiful, definitely beautiful, definitely beautiful, over and over again until they will never misspell either one of those words again. I make them show all their work in math and then hide it on their final drafts in English. I make them realize that if you got this, then you follow this. And if somebody tries to judge you based on what you make, you give them this. Let me break it down for you. Let me break it down for you so you know what I say is true. I make a goddamn difference. Now what about you?
That was Taylor Molly, who is a poet and former teacher. We chose to use this video as the introduction to our presentation because we think it goes along really well with the 2 NPR articles that we read this week. The first article, "Schools Can Save Lives," an exit interview with the Secretary of Education by Corey Turner, especially reflects the idea of how important teachers and a good education are. There are so many negatives about teaching, and we've been talking about them the last few weeks, and we've all heard the horror stories of teachers. But I just thought this was a good idea to show that teaching does matter, and it is important, and we need to remember that when it gets hard, and we do have to go through those challenges. And especially, like he mentions, things about money or the respect that we get from our country. But also, as John B. King Jr. mentions, schools can save and change the lives of children, and we need to do everything and anything we can do to protect them and support them and make sure we are giving them the best education possible. The other article, "Maybe Teaching Special Ed Doesn't Have to Be So Hard" by Lee Hall, also ties into this just because it's again focusing on the positive things that can come out of education and a good education system, and one where they're focusing on the students rather than having to deal with all the paperwork and the bureaucracy of it. The teacher in the article does say that it's still a really tough job and she constantly is working, but she is getting a lot of support from her school and her administrators, so that allows her to do her job well and to focus on the students. So as I said, the job is challenging, but when we focus on them and their needs and we think about what we can do to help them, it will be worth it, and we will be making a difference.
Hi everyone, my name's Allie J. I'm a junior at UB, studying math education. I hope to become a math teacher in the years to come, teaching, middle school or high school math. I'd like you guys in your comments to let me know what major you guys are going into and if you're a teacher or not, just so I kind of get a little bit of a background about you guys. All right, thank you. So I'm going to start today talking about the article, Maybe Teaching Special Ed Doesn't Have to Be So Hard by Lee Hale. As you guys know, it follows the story of Stephanie Johnson, a special education teacher who went from one school where she was being loaded with paperwork, loaded with work, spending all hours of the day there, to where she is now, having that kind of balance between another teacher and her so that she can focus on the teaching in the classroom and the other teacher can focus on the paperwork. So first off, I would like to add my opinion, because personally I had no idea how much paperwork went into special ed. I've never thought about going into special ed or really looked into it until I actually read this article and did a bunch of research about it. And it's interesting to me because my aunt is actually a special education teacher, and I never really asked her about it, or she never really talked about it, so I wasn't sure if she was kind of in the same boat, which I'm going to talk about later during this presentation about what I kind of asked her and what her opinion was. So I wanted to start and say that the article kind of focused on how good special education teachers are hard to find and most teachers don't last. I feel like during my research I have looked, and teaching is so hard. Schools have such a hard time finding teachers in general, and special education teachers are even harder to find, which I don't know if anyone else feels this way, but it's very upsetting because these kids need, their special education for a reason. They need more support, they need more time, they need more patience, and the fact that schools are having trouble finding teachers in general is just extremely upsetting to me, and I just don't feel like it should be that way. I know that, in an ideal world, we would have a surplus of teachers and they would all be extremely qualified, but I understand that that's not how this works. There's so much work after reading the article, and hearing from Stephanie about all the paperwork and talking to my aunt. I couldn't believe how much work went into it. And Stephanie talks about how the focus should be on teaching, and how, she didn't like the whole paperwork aspect. She was focusing more on the paperwork and the requirements and everything like that, and couldn't really focus on the child during the day because she knew she was going to be there all day, doing paperwork. And yeah, so special education is so important, and I love hearing how teachers take that seriously, especially Stephanie. And after hearing where she is now, I'm really happy for her, because I hope that all of you guys are really happy for her, that she kind of found this, happy medium where she can go to school and focus on teaching and focus on the students and not have to worry about the paperwork side. Because the focus should really be on teaching, and although the paperwork aspect is necessary, it's frustrating, obviously, for her, and frustrating for most special education teachers that feel this. It's the exact same way, that they're just drowning in this paperwork. So at the end of the article, we found out that Stephanie is at a new school, and she has another teacher who was hired just to do the paperwork aspect. Obviously, I've read some of your guys' DDJs that you guys posted by Monday, and I read that you guys kind of felt that in an ideal world this would be great, but unfortunately it doesn't really work that way, and I felt the exact same way. I understand that, Stephanie's happy and the other teacher likes to do paperwork, which is so hard to find, and that's why in an ideal world this system would work. But unfortunately, that's not how it is. It's teachers, articles that I've read, and in this article, schools are struggling to find special education teachers in general. So the fact that they need a special education teacher plus the teacher to do the paperwork is very rare, even though it seems to work out in this scenario. Also, a problem with that I saw, and I'm not sure if any other of you guys have saw, but the cost of hiring another teacher, to do paperwork all day, because I feel like it's not cheap, because nobody really likes to do paperwork all day like that. I mean, I know some people do, so it might not be that hard to find a job like that, but you have to also be involved in the classroom because you can't just do paperwork and not like see the child or interact with the classroom. So you kind of have to have a teacher that will spend the time with special education teachers and the students and also do the paperwork all day. So that's kind of my opinion about the article. I'd love to get what you guys think. Something I would actually like to add would be an article that I found that I'm posting in our folder and in Dropbox, so you guys will be able to see it. It's off of the same website, so you guys should be allowed to see it. I'm gonna post the actual article, so you guys can look right from there while you're listening to this video, or whatever you guys choose to do. So I added this separate article because I felt like it portrayed the same ideas as the article that we were given for this week. It's called "Behind the Shortage of Special Ed Teachers, Long Hours, Crushing Paperwork." So this is an article by L. Hale, and it goes on to describe how schools all around the world are in a shortage for teachers in general, which I kind of spoke about earlier. Forgetting about replacing them with the same quality. So one of the principals says that, he said, forget about replacing them with someone of the same quality. He said, I'm just worried about replacing them, period. This frustrated me so much, and I'm sure it frustrated a lot of you guys as teachers and as aspiring teachers, whichever you are, because you understand where the principal is coming from, hearing how there's a shortage of teachers, but special education teachers are they're so specialized and they need special training, and just finding a general education teacher to teach these special education classes isn't really fair to the student, nor the teacher, nor the school, nor the parents. So it's really not fair to anybody because nobody's getting, the general education teachers are upset because this is not what they kind of signed up for. They didn't expect to be going into this. They're doing it because, they might need a job, but special education isn't their first priority. And the students aren't they're taken seriously, but it's not fair to them because they don't have the same as a special education teacher, like who specializes in special education. They're not getting the same opportunities. So, like I said, this article, if you guys want to read the whole thing, it's in the Dropbox. It just talks about how, on top of the normal demands of teaching, special education teachers face additional pressures like feelings of isolation, fear of lawsuits, and students who demand extra attention. See, I understand. I mean, I'm not a special education teacher, and like I said, I was going to speak about my aunt, but these special education teachers they already have these feelings, and then now they're feeling more pressure because they might be the only special education teacher in their district or in the school, and all this pressure is being put on them, plus the amount of paperwork like we saw with the article about Stephanie Johnson. So I just wanted to add a little bit of input also with my aunt. I talked to her a little bit, and she wasn't comfortable feeling recorded, which is fine. So I just asked her a few questions about what it's like to be a special education teacher, and she's actually a speech therapy teacher, so she works with a bunch of special education students, and she pretty much told me, she's like, it is the best job in the world. She said, you get to be a part of the student's life in a very important way, which really spoke to me and, made me happy as an aspiring teacher because, you don't hear that often. But she did speak about how the new requirements with Medicaid are requiring teachers to do progress reports of students every day, and how teachers are being buried in paperwork. So this is similar to the Stephanie Johnson article, but what's different about it is my aunt says that like the Medicaid requirements, like doing progress reports, are frustrating because she doesn't really think that they're necessary. She puts in the time with her students, but as sad as it is, most students don't make a ton of progress. So making teachers do progress reports isn't really helping anybody. I understand why progress reports are necessary, maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks, depending on the progress of the student. But every day, you can't expect special education students to be making like astronomical amounts of progress each.
The first chapter of Content Area Writing by Harvey Daniels, Stephen Zemelman, and Nancy Steinecke first asks a question about whether there really is a writing crisis, and it gives kind of the back and forth to the two sides. From my own experience in schools, I do think a lot of focus is taken off good writing, And I think a lot of that is due to class sizes. The school that I was in had 31 students in every classroom, and I just think it makes it so hard to individualize instruction and focus on the struggling readers and writers or students in the class. Um, I do think that they are writing more than ever, though, because of technology and the internet, and they're just in constant contact with their friends and family. In the schools that I've been in, they're writing notes back and forth, they're texting during class, they're jotting down song lyrics that are their own or just a song that they like. Even though this isn't typical in what we expect to hear about writing in school, I think it is really helpful. And it does help them develop the skills that they need in writing for after high school, just in the form of practice, I think. The authors do mention, of course, how important academic writing is, though, which we all know, I assume. They mention that it helps them become more engaged, it helps them pass standardized tests, it helps them go further with their education, it helps them in the workplace, and it just helps them in life in general. I think the example of the workplace is one of the biggest ones that we have to remember, because I don't think it really gets talked about a lot. We just think of students going off to college and then they'll learn to be better writers there. This book, The Rise of Writing by Deborah Brandt, describes how much writing is being done in the workplace across pretty much every job. She interviews people from different backgrounds and walks of life and just all kinds of different careers. And the one commonality that they all have is that they're writing intensive, even when the people don't expect them to be. They're not going into a writing field or an English field. They're not expecting to have to write, but just because the way of our society is going, pretty much every job that they're going to have, there's going to be some kind of writing. And they're going to need to learn the skills in our classroom to be able to write in these different situations. And they have to translate these skills to all those different situations that they're going to need and that is necessary for them in their job. For this assignment, this presentation, I asked a high school student that I know to write down the writing that she did throughout one day as a senior, and it was very boring. Her list included lab reports, research reports, and just a few worksheets that she was given, and that was all the writing that she did the whole day. And while these are obviously necessary and important, and we're going to have to do them and teach them, there was nothing in her day that seemed really interesting or enjoyable at all. I think to help fix this crisis, if we think it's a crisis or not, we need to blend the academic writing with fun, interesting writing that students will actually enjoy. Created this poster asking the question, what does your classroom look like? I think today's classroom just cannot be the left side, the reading and writing. With the progression of the technology that we have, that's pretty much in every classroom now, we can just do so much more and make our classroom so much more engaging. So I think we do have to include things like music and movies, games and art to get students interested in learning and helping them as they leave school and further their education or start in the workforce. The authors do mention the problems that come with teaching. For example, they mention that we are teaching too much and not focusing on the most important things. They also mention that teachers have concerns about teaching to the standards or teaching to tests, and that makes it hard to put a heavy focus on good writing in the classroom. So they talk about going deeper and asking yourselves questions about whether something really needs to be taught in the classroom. This reminded me of a chapter in the book Teach on Purpose by David Burns and Sturgios Batzakis. They write about being sincere in the classroom and asking sincere questions. We need to respond to what the students' needs are in our classroom, and we need to help them find purpose and meaning in what we are teaching. As teachers, we need to make sure that what the students are learning is relevant and they are making connections to their own lives. If we can do this while helping them pass those tests and making sure that we are meeting our standards, we will help them become better writers and we will help them succeed outside of our classroom. So let me know what you think about the writing crisis, if you've seen it in your own experience or what you see in schools that you work in. Let me know what you think. I've also provided a link to the Burns and Batzakis book. It is free through UB Library if you wanted to check that out.
But I'm focusing on chapter 2, which is very important to me because it doesn't really affect math in a way, but I think all students, from K through 12 and even like some college students could really relate to some of the stuff that is talked about. And as educators, I feel like most of us could probably agree with what's being said in this chapter, which I'm about to discuss. If you guys have any disagreements, I would love to hear them because I'm curious to know if you think this chapter is accurate or meaningful. So just add your comments below. So one quote that I'd like to add from the book was on page 25, and it says, "The intensive correction of student papers does not work. It has never worked, and it will never work." I wasn't sure how I felt about this because to some extent, I understand like correction of papers. You need to be able to test kids' research skills, you need to be able to test their writing skills, their grammar. I understand that. So I do agree that the intensive correction is sometimes not necessary for example, for free writes, as this chapter Writing to Learn talked about. But it will never work is something that, you can't really... I personally wasn't sure how I felt about this because it's like, how can you say it'll never work when you never really know? So the author expresses how everyday instances is using writing as a tool of thinking. So this begins the chapter, and he talks about how, even when you don't want to be writing or you don't think that you're writing, you are. Like whether it's shopping list or, scribbles or doodles when you're during lecture or taking notes, it's writing. It's a form of writing. So, the idea of writing to learns are what the author states as they need to be casual, unedited, off the top of our heads, something that should not be marked for correctness by the teacher. Grammar should not be circled. There should probably be no red pen, just maybe teacher's comments in red pen. So the authors just claim that the writing to learns should just be based off of, what the students think and shouldn't be premeditated or anything like that. So what I did for this is I kind of thought about what free writes I did in middle or high school. I remember going to English class and having teachers, ask me about the chapter, not really about content, but gave me an idea. Even in college, they give me an idea and they ask me to express how I feel about it. And when I got the grade back, it wasn't 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10, grammar circled. It was a check mark. And on the back was, "Oh, Allie, I feel like I agree with this and you make a good point." And that's honestly what writing to learns are all about. These writing to learns should purpose both the student and the teacher because it allows the teacher to see what the student is thinking from their perspective. And also it allows the teacher to start discussions within the classroom, seeing if two students have the same ideas. It can review key ideas and makes the student and teacher think about things in another way. Also, the idea of group work is good because, like I said, if you have two students or a few students who think the same thing, you can kind of get them to elaborate in a group together and it just starts discussion. And to be honest, I feel like we have a lot of formal papers, even in middle and high school. We have a lot of formal papers and research papers where, yes, that's where teachers can grade students based off of content, writing style, research skills, and stuff like that. And the free writes just kind of open the student's mind and allow them to not just be sitting there bored and just listening to a teacher lecture all day. It is important as educators to realize that students shouldn't just be simple note-taking is something that the authors claimed. I completely agreed with this because I know in high school and middle school, more predominantly high school, I would sit and copy down notes that we did during class or copy something from the book or do little fill in the blanks, and it was just reiterating facts and I really wasn't thinking about anything, and instead I was probably doing other homework or texting, something I don't want to admit, but I know it definitely happened, and that was something that I didn't find helpful because all it was copying from a textbook or copying from a slide. So writing to learn can improve class discussions, activate thinking and misconceptions, provide individual goals, and surface students' prior knowledge. This is really important to me because I believe that these writing to learns help the kids put their ideas into puts kids' ideas into their own words. Like the idea of copying, if you talked about the Boston Tea Party and you just reiterated the definition of the Boston Tea Party, but instead you got students thinking about what it would be like to live during the Boston Tea Party and how they would react. And that just kind of gets them thinking and not just doing a simple, 5 to 10 minute task where they're just copying from a book. I'd like to know how you guys would incorporate this into your field of study, and do you agree with this and find this useful? For me, math is hard because it's hard to ask students to write about math when it's primarily numbers. I'd like to, maybe once a week ask students, why they're struggling or why they feel like what they don't understand. But that's more of a predominantly like a student-teacher conversation one-on-one instead of, having group discussions or class discussions once a week. Definitely for other fields of study, I think this can be very helpful. Science, theories, and like English, free writes about books and novels and research, and also social studies about, history. I think that would be great. So another quote that I found from this article or from this chapter of the book was from Learning Research that in order for learners to understand and remember ideas, they must act upon them. And this just kind of wraps up what the chapter was about. It talked about how these writing to learns facilitate discussion and students' own ideas instead of just reiterating something from a book, or it just gets students' mind rolling. And I feel like most students probably don't like school, and it's hard for them to be interested in something when all they're doing is remembering facts and something like that. Having them express their ideas in their own words is, I think, one of the greatest things, and I think it's very beneficial. And I'd just like to get your guys' opinion about this. Like I said, I want to know your guys' field of study, so I kind of know how you would incorporate this. I love the idea of free writes, so do you guys think free writes in journals are useful or not useful? Whatever you guys think, just comment below. I'd really enjoy that. Thanks for listening. Thank you.